Hi, welcome. So I'm Stephanie Bellchambers. I'm head of the private law family department here at Biscoe Solicitors and also one of the directors of the company. Joined with me today, I've got Liza Gatrell. She's one of our associate solicitors and she specialises in fertility law. Liza, welcome.
Hello.
What made you specialise in this very niche area of law, because there aren't many lawyers or solicitors firms that actually offer this as a service?
No, there aren't. It is a really specialist area, and it's one that's probably been growing quite steadily over the last few years. So I initially qualified as a family solicitor back in 2009, giving away my age a little bit perhaps. And then come 2014, we started to have discussions as to whether or not we could move into fertility and surrogacy law. So we've been doing it as a firm now for a number of years. What led me to decide that this was something that I really wanted to pursue was because in 2014 I was going through my own fertility issues. So I had a son of my own. I had one son already at that point, but I then found myself in this area of secondary infertility, multiple miscarriages, and I guess it starts to make you realise that whilst this was something that I was able to overcome, and I've now got 3 healthy children, it makes you realise what some people really do go through to build their family. And ultimately, there is nothing greater than helping somebody to expand their family. And it was something that I decided that I really wanted to go all in with, to try and really help as many people as I could that were going through difficulties.
Yeah, and it seems to be one of those areas where you don't know actually how many people are having those types of difficulties, because it's often not talked about. I didn't know about the issues you were going through, and probably at that same time, 2014, I was undergoing IVF as well, having had my first child in 2015. So we would have started the IVF process in 2014 through different issues. So off the back of infertility, some people aren't infertile, but they have other reasons why they go through IVF. So in our case, it's a genetic disorder. I think it's far better to try and have these conversations and to talk about it, and you're very brave to do so, to open up. But I think then you have empathy and you have more understanding with the clients that you're seeing on a daily basis. So thank you for that, and I just think that adds to your specialism and your knowledge. So in terms of one specific area of fertility law and surrogacy, what is surrogacy?
So, put very simply, surrogacy is where a woman carries and gives birth to a child for another person or couple.
Okay. And what are the benefits of choosing surrogacy as a method of expanding your family? Or what are the disadvantages? You know, there's probably advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, I think with surrogacy, it tends to be perhaps, it will depend, I guess, on whether you're in a same-sex couple or a heterosexual couple. So, for example, if you're in a heterosexual couple, you'll often come to surrogacy as a last resort. So it's often because you've got, either infertility issues or cancer treatment or something along those lines that means that you cannot the woman cannot carry a child herself. That will often lead them down the surrogacy path. And then for same-sex couples, it's often because they would like to have a biological link to the child. So one of them, by going down the surrogacy route rather than perhaps adoption, one of them would be able to be the biological parent.
Okay. So do we have surrogacy laws in the UK that help us and protect all parties involved?
So surrogacy laws in the UK are really complex. Whilst surrogacy arrangements are legal and always have been legal, there are issues in that you cannot enter into legally binding surrogacy contracts. So when parties enter into a surrogacy arrangement in the UK, there is a huge amount of trust that goes into these relationships. And that can leave both the surrogates and the intended parents in a really difficult position. And I'll often get asked, well, what would happen if the surrogate decided that she didn't want to hand over the baby after birth, and vice versa.
Really
The surrogate will be
the biggest
yeah,
concern, isn't it?
yeah.
That the intended parents don't get the child at the end of all of this.
And the other concern is for the surrogate, and she'll say, well, what if the intended parents change their mind? And
Yeah.
then I've given birth to the baby and they don't want the baby anymore. So it does leave a degree of uncertainty there. That being said, issues with surrogacy arrangements are really minuscule. We really don't get many problems with them. There is this trust, and if you use, there are a number of non-for-profit surrogacy agencies within the UK, and they really do base their surrogacy arrangements on trust and building relationships. And lots of surrogacy arrangements within the UK will often also be family members that will assist.
So the key is building that trust from the beginning, perhaps using help, as you say, from those outside independent agencies. And then again with the lawyers, so you can think about putting in place a surrogacy agreement, although I think there's issues with lawyers doing that, but you can advise upon what goes in that surrogacy agreement. And what would you say is the biggest benefit of having such an agreement in place that the parties would do?
Yeah, so I mean, the important thing to point out is that surrogacy agreements, they are not enforceable. So no matter what you put in your surrogacy agreement, there's nothing that you can do if either side break that agreement. But the purpose of them is to be really upfront and have those discussions right at the beginning, because often with many areas of law, in fact, when problems occur and things break down, it's often because people had different expectations as to what was going to happen. So the idea with a surrogacy agreement is to manage those expectations and make sure that everybody is on the same page as to what the agreement is and the arrangements will be.
Yeah. And you can cover things like what the expectations are pre-pregnancy, during pregnancy, and then from giving birth, labour, and in the hospital. All of those steps, can't you?
Yeah, and it's really important that they are, as all of those things are thought about.
And the more discussions you have, and the more things that the parties record down, the more likely the trust is going to continue, and there's going to be a happy result at the end. So given that, why do you think that some intended parents go abroad for surrogacy? Because presumably it's a lot more expensive.
Oh yeah, it can be. I mean, particularly if you go to countries where commercial surrogacy is allowed. I think it comes down to this worry, if you like, in the UK, that it's not a binding agreement, that you can't get a pre-birth order or have a legally binding surrogacy agreement that sends people abroad. And I think for people that want that reassurance that they will be the legal parents from the child's birth, then perhaps it is worthwhile paying that bit of extra money, and that is perhaps what causes a lot of intended parents to go abroad. I mean, I think what's important to remember there, though, is that if you are intending to bring up the child in the UK, whether or not you go abroad and you are named as, so if you have a pre-birth order in some countries, you will then, as the intended parents, be immediately put on the child's birth certificate in that country. So you may well have a birth certificate with your names as the intended parents on it. What's important to remember from the UK perspective is that you are still not recognised as the child's legal parent. So with surrogacy law in the UK, the surrogate will always be the legal mother of the child. And if she's married, her husband will always be the legal father. If she's not married, then there's some choice as to who the second legal parent would be. But that's irrespective of whether you were named as the intended parents as the birth certificate in another country. So it's really important that you understand the procedure for sorting that out, if you like, when you get back to the UK.
And I guess some immigration advice is probably needed there as well, alongside international surrogacy advice from this country before you go off and embark on that journey.
Yeah, I think if you're entering into an international arrangement, then it is really important that you are getting surrogacy advice from this country, surrogacy advice from the country that you are going to do the arrangement in immigration advice from this country, and immigration advice from the country that you are going to as well, because the complicating factor with international surrogacy is obviously we've got to get the baby home as well. So we've got to make sure that that's something we can do, and as quickly as possible. Yeah.
So if we're doing surrogacy in this country, everything's gone well, the fertility treatment, the pregnancy, the birth, the intended parent or parents have got the child with them at home, what do they need to do next?
So they need to apply for a parental order. So a parental order is the one-stop legal solution in the UK to reassign parentage. And what that will do is transfer the parentage from the surrogate and her husband, if she's married, to the intended parent. And they will get a new birth certificate confirming that they are the parents on that as well.
Yeah. I guess we would admit that our laws currently are far from perfect at the moment, but there are changes afoot, and I think that's something that we should talk about another day, because there are some real positives coming on the horizon, and lots of people have campaigned for this. So those are on the horizon, but if we're looking at the situation now, then we're looking at trust up front. We're looking at as much information being shared as possible, recording down between the parties what their expectations are. We're then applying for the parental order post-birth to sort out all of the legal rights. And generally it works. I've never heard of a situation, I've never had a client who hasn't ended up with what they were expecting by the end. Have you had that?
I have had one.
One.
Unfortunately, it was a UK surrogacy arrangement, and I think, in all honesty, it came down to that not researching prior to it taking place. In fact, the intended parents had never even heard of a parental order, so the baby had arrived, and they actually came for advice in relation to an adoption. It was a family friend who had been the surrogate, and she didn't consent to the proceedings, or consent to the parental order taking place. The baby was living with the intended parents, and it was always intended that that would continue, so there's no issue with regards to that. But I think it comes down to that understanding what the situation is and what everybody's expectations were. And in those circumstances, unfortunately, the intended parents and the surrogate, they had very different expectations as to what would happen. So it certainly wasn't a case where the surrogate wanted to keep the baby or anything like that.
No.
But certainly it does highlight the fact that it's really important that if you're entering into these types of arrangements, that you get that legal advice right at the beginning.
Yeah, that's absolutely key. And finally, given we're in this situation, I know everyone is fed up of hearing the word, but has COVID affected surrogacy arrangements or obtaining parental orders at the current time?
I mean, unfortunately it has. It's had a huge impact on surrogacy, mostly in relation to international arrangements. Obviously there's been international travel bans in place, and so during this time, obviously 9 months ago, people weren't aware that there was going to be this huge worldwide virus, so it's not something that anybody planned for, and therefore we've been in the unfortunate situation where babies are being born to surrogates abroad, and the intended parents are having to try and get to the country for the birth, and also to try and get the baby back following the birth. So it has been really, really difficult. Some of the avenues that intended parents would have perhaps used previously to bring the baby home, such as emergency passports, particularly with the US, they've been closed down completely, so they haven't been able to access those. So it is really important at the moment that if anybody is currently going through this international surrogacy arrangement and the baby is due to be born in the next couple of weeks or months, that they make sure they are absolutely getting some immigration advice at the moment as to A, how they're going to get there, and then B, how they're going to get back. We have a fabulous immigration department who are always on hand to help with any questions, but it is important at the moment that is something that is considered. I mean, as far as UK arrangements are concerned, there has been a halt on birth certificates being issued. And previously you would have needed to have the child's birth certificate before you can make your application for a parental parental order. That being said, at the moment, that isn't a requirement. Obviously, it will need to be provided at some point, but you are able to submit your application without the birth certificate at the present time, because courts are obviously aware that that's something that you cannot obtain at the moment. And there have been issues with regards to intended parents being present at the birth, because some hospitals have restricted the number of people that are allowed in the birthing suite. Hopefully, that is easing up a little bit now. But yeah, there have been immense issues with surrogacy over the last
and fertility treatment being on hold for a period of time, that's now been lifted, thank goodness. So the treatments can now happen, but I think there's a backlog, as there is everywhere at the moment. So that's quite disappointing when people are probably mid-cycles. They were taking all of their fertility drugs to start the process. I think that's been really hard on people as well. And then obtaining the parental orders, are the courts closed? Are you still able to obtain your parental order?
Yeah, the courts are open. I mean, obviously it's working differently. Everything's being done remotely at the moment. So the hearings are taking place, but they are being dealt with remotely, which is a shame, because surrogacy hearings are perhaps some of the most positive hearings that we deal with, and they are usually a lovely celebration with the judge or magistrate, and that's not able to happen at the moment, but the orders are still being made.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And I think it would be helpful if we could have a discussion another day in terms of the changes that are coming on the horizon, because I think that's quite exciting and quite important that people are aware of that. And it's a long time coming. So thank you very much for joining me today.
No problem.
Stay safe.
Thanks, Steph. Bye.
Bye.